from the broken water wells of Palestine and the excavated reservations of the Sioux Fall Indian Reservation in North Dakota, to the urban streets of New York City, Cleveland, Ohio, and other venues, and even the hallowed worship venues of Mother Emanuel in South Carolina and the Sikh Temple in Wisconsin, we see and feel the massive boulder of oppression. We sing freedom songs in the hope of a time when, as the African-American hymn says, the wicked will cease from troubling and the weary will be at rest. But as we sing our aspirations of hope toward the heavens, we also realize that there is no ultimate liberation on this earth without human effort, and our best human efforts frequently collapse under the exhaustion of tired arms, weary feet, and empty minds, without the refreshment of friends, colleagues, and partners whom we depend upon to pick us up and spur us forward. It is within the vein of this journey towards liberation that we invited you to come this evening. We want to acknowledge our co-conveners of AIM, Mark Davidson. Mark, if you would just raise your hand. Mark Davidson, and also Miriam Thompson. And Miriam is in the back. And we want to thank both of them for their leadership on this effort. We also want to acknowledge our many partners who are listed on the program that you have in front of you. Some of you may have it as a flyer. And I also see those whom we approached about this forum several months ago. We approached Dean Carlton Wilson of the College of Arts and Sciences. We approached also Dr. Irving Joyner in the School of Law, and of course he's here tonight, Dr. Jarvis Hall from the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences. And we want to thank you as well for hosting this forum. Without further ado, we want to thank all of our co-sponsors and invite our panelists to begin making their way to the stage so that we can begin listening to their presentations on linking liberation struggles. I'm proud to say that it is approximately 6:29 and we are on time. Our panelists each will speak for 10 minutes. And you will be timed, but we want to acknowledge these very astute, committed, and dedicated scholars, lecturers, activists, leaders in not only Durham, but also in the state of North Carolina and with their respective organizations. First up will be Jillian Johnson. Jillian is a member of the Durham City Council, and she is so active in many efforts. We are proud to have her with us. We'll follow Jillian with Dr. Benjamin Frey, who is a Native American of the East Band Cherokee tribe. He also is a professor at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. After which we will hear from Dr. Burhan Ghanahim, who was born and raised in occupied Palestine. He's earned degrees from Cowell University and the University of Texas. He joined the National Institutes of Health, worked with the Jerusalem Fund to establish 3 diabetes treatment centers in Palestine, and is currently chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Muslim American Public Affairs Council. Please join me in applauding our 3 panelists this evening. After our panelists have spoken, we will hear from respondent voices. And we have Ramon Zepeda, who is with the Student Action with Farm Workers, Felicia Arriaga, who is with the Durham Solidarity Center, and Beth Bruch, who is with Jewish Voice for Peace. We also have one who is here with us, drove 5 hours. Tennyson Wellborn will also come and share as a respondent voice. We are very appreciative for all of them this evening.
That's it. Yep. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for inviting me to speak. I'm going to be speaking on the topic of Black liberation, and when I first got the topic, I felt a little bit overwhelmed by the enormity of what that could mean, and I decided to try to crowdsource some answers and actually put it on my Facebook page. What does Black liberation mean to you? And most of the answers I got were also similarly overwhelmed. This is a humongous topic that means a lot of different things for us, and there really isn't any easy definition or easy way to talk about it. And so I decided to turn to images and to try to express what Black liberation looks like and feels like to me, and in the ways that I think are the most important and most resonant definitions. And so when I think of Black liberation, I think of collective self-determination for all of our communities, of freedom from oppression and of freedom to resist any oppression that we might face. The opening of possibilities for self-expression in new and interesting ways, to be respected without the weight of the politics of respectability. And so I have a few slides that I've prepared to talk about a few of these ideas. So to me, Black liberation means the freedom to take up space and to enter spaces that are traditionally closed to Black people and to claim them and remake them. This woman is the first Black prima ballerina for the New York City Ballet. And for me, I think that it doesn't mean, I don't want that to mean us going and joining the same institutions that have been oppressing us and repressing us every day for hundreds of years. It doesn't mean that if we get Black CEOs and Black presidents, that everything will be okay. But that we are working towards and achieving a radically inclusive version of everyday spaces, schools, coffee shops, community centers, Broadway studios, and also yoga studios. This is Jessamine Stanley from Durham, North Carolina, who is now a nationally famous yoga instructor, and talks a lot about going into yoga and being surrounded in rooms with very thin white women and feeling very out of place. And so her vision is of a world where we are all able to access these spaces and these practices, and that is a form of liberation. Black liberation also means the ability to express ourselves fully, openly, and honestly, to fully inhabit our own bodies and have those bodies be respected and protected from harm. It means a world where queer and trans Black people are free to live our lives as we choose without judgment or stigma from any community. This is Laverne Cox, one of our amazing Black trans women activists and actresses. And this is a random guy dressed up as Captain America. And this is Willow Smith, who has also been in the media as a very, very willing to express herself in interesting ways and to be outside of the box that of traditional Black culture. And I put this guy up here because I'm a nerd, and so are interested in nerd culture. And there is not a lot of space in sort of like comic book and nerd culture for Black folks to do cosplay and to be into nerd stuff. And so I was really excited by this guy just being like, I'm gonna be Captain America, I'm gonna be badass. So, I'm sorry, back to this. So I think it also means a world where we can just, put on costumes and be weird, and that isn't seen through a race-determined lens. Black liberation means having a sense of place, of home, of land that belongs to us. And for me, that means that Black liberation has to include reparations. This is a map of the Southeast population, the slave population in the Southeast United States in 1860. And as you can see, where in all of these communities where there were large concentrations of slaves, there are still large concentrations of Black folks. There have been a number of major migrations, the Great Migration, where a large number of Black people from the South moved north to Detroit, Chicago, and New York. And now we're seeing that actually reverse itself. People are coming back. People my age and younger are migrating back to the South, to the homelands of our ancestors, and are feeling more of a sense of place and of home from being back in the Southeast. And this is land that was really built, farmed by slaves. All of the economic vitality and wealth that was produced in this region was done on the backs of Black slaves. And so for me, this region as a homeland for Black people feels like an important essence of Black liberation. And finally, I think Black liberation means standing up with each other when we need to make it clear that we are human beings, that we will not be silent, that when issues of injustice face our community, that there will be powerful, intelligent, strong resistance and voices in opposition, standing up or climbing up or sitting down, whichever you choose. And finally, I think these are the most important slides, that Black liberation means that you bring the party. Because our time with friends and family, having fun, just being together, joy and community and enjoyment of life is critical to liberation, and just having life, having a full experience, being with your community and enjoying things is important. I'm going to talk a little bit about the theme of this panel, which is linking liberation struggles, particularly around Black liberation, Native Americans, and Palestinians. And I want to say first that I don't believe that drawing parallels and drawing strength and knowledge from each other is meant to draw an equivalence between struggles or between peoples, that the Palestinian struggle against military occupation, the Native American struggle against displacement, Black American struggle against a racist police state are clearly not the same, do not have the same historical circumstances, do not have the same outcomes for communities. But I think that we can learn a lot about each of these struggles by looking at them collectively and gain a collective analysis and framework of racism and ethnic violence that exists in the world. So I just want to highlight a few things that I think seem significant to me in terms of linkages. That all of our communities are where we are in diaspora directly because of a legacy of European colonialism, because of Black people being brought here by Europeans, because of Native Americans being forced out by Europeans, and because of Palestine being colonized by Europeans. And so there are moments in history where we can see all of these, the networks and the paths on which all of these things started happening in the same physical location and in the same time and space. We are all in situations where we have been and continue to be deprived of basic resources in the form of land, wealth, and power. I think that's clear in terms of Black Americans in that, we never got our 40 acres and a mule. And if you were to actually calculate how much 40 acres and a mule would be worth now, the amount of wealth in the Black community that would have created for us is just extraordinary. And clearly, with ethnic cleansing in Palestine, people have been denied access to their land and also access to power. And then, of course, Native American communities that have been pushed from their ancestral lands and onto reservations. I recently read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, and it's really informed my thinking around the idea of racial caste. Alexander defines racial caste as a racial group locked into an inferior position by law and custom. And she argues that Jim Crow and slavery were racial caste systems, and that our current system of mass incarceration is also a racial caste system. And I would argue that we are all three of these communities are at the bottom or near the bottom of violent racial caste systems, the results of which we see in many aspects of our different lives in the criminal justice system, in education, in healthcare, and in general dehumanization and bigotry that's directed at our communities. Just a few ways that we see this happening in these three communities in particular. One is the achievement gap in education. Palestinian citizens of Israel actually have the worst achievement gap in the world. In the United States, Black students score approximately 1 standard deviation below white students, and in Israel, Arab students average 1.3 standard deviations behind Jewish students. And on Native American reservations, this is just the Native American population in general, only less than 20% of Native American fourth graders are proficient or on level in reading and math, compared to 42% of white students. And a lot of Native schools lack basic necessities, don't have any advanced classes. So it's really an entirely different education system in the US for Black and Native students and in Israel for Palestinian students. There are very serious disparities in terms of access to wealth and resources. In the US, the median income for Black households is 60% that of white households, but the wealth gap is even worse. The average Black household has 6% of the wealth of the white household, and the average Native household has 8.7%. That's based on data from 2000. It was actually very difficult to find economic data on Native Americans. This is not something that is being studied very efficiently. But we know, and what people, what is clear is that there is very clearly an income gap and a wealth gap in Native communities. And finally, I wanted to speak a little bit about interactions with the state. I've been involved in the Black Lives Matter movement and think that it's been really exciting and powerful for me to join in this movement as this has become more of a national issue. I think for Black folks, we've always known that we were at risk in police interactions. I remember, having those conversations with my parents when I was a kid, when a young child was shot by police for playing with a toy gun when I was about 8 years old, and had the same conversations with my parents that I'm having with my kids now about interactions with the police and racism. But what a lot of people don't know is that Native Americans are actually being killed by police at an even higher rate relative to population. That Native Americans are most likely to be killed by police relative to population, and so that's something that's really important, I think, for us to all remember, particularly in the Black Lives Matter movement. And finally, I want to speak a little bit about the exciting uprisings that we've been seeing all over the country and all over the world from people in these communities. There were some pictures from Standing Rock on the previous slideshow, which is the most exciting and powerful display of Native American solidarity that I have seen in my lifetime. And it has really inspired and amazed me, and a number of people I know have been out there, and I've found that uprising has engaged a lot of folks in the Black Lives Matter movement and in other resistance movements to be together and to learn about each other's struggles. And then in the Black Lives Matter movement for the last couple of years has created and sustained both this really exciting spirit of resistance with marching and being out in the street and nonviolent protests, but has also put forth a number of really exciting reform and policy agendas. The Movement for Black Lives has a many page political agenda that they have put out that is really exciting and addresses everything from education to healthcare to community safety. And so there are a lot of ways in which I think these movements are really rising up right now in this moment, and learning a lot from each other and moving forward in really exciting ways. And that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Hawa, siyo, nigada gum. Siyo, Tuya diga salzanahi dagwadoa no le tichalagi. He ada chalagi gawani histi tiwani ska hinawu. He ada anas no heska dudo ada gawani histi no le dunadatska in language and community. I'm going to talk about language shift, endangerment, and revitalization. And I think it's worth saying why I'm going to talk about these things. And, we've heard a lot about marginalization and attempts at displacement, attempts at erasure. And I think erasure and invisibility is probably the largest problem for American Indians today. I had to laugh a little bit at the previous presentation when you said it's hard to get data on this because it's very under-researched. And that's like the story of my life. I have to say, oh, you don't know anything about us. I wonder why that is, But I also think it's worth mentioning that it's not just physically and bodily that we're being displaced and erased. It's also spiritually, it's also culturally. And one of the reasons why I think language cuts to the quick is because they are not simply trying to destroy us, they are trying to destroy our souls. The language is the soul of our community. And without the language, we would lack the ways of understanding the world that are intrinsic to our people. So I care very much about the Cherokee language and proliferating it. And I wanted to give a little bit of data here. There are only about 250 first language speakers of Cherokee left in North Carolina, the vast majority of whom are over the age of 60. For those that don't know, North Carolina is the homeland of Cherokee people. We call ourselves Anigidu Wagin. We don't call ourselves Cherokee, that's just our check cashing name, our government name, as it were. But that came from a word from another people. It was a Muskogean word that meant either people of a different language or people who live in caves. So that was what we were called. We have adopted that. We have begun to go by that. But it's not our true name. Our true name is Anigidu Wagi. And the reason for that is because we are named after the town of Gadua, which is 15 minutes outside of Bryson City, North Carolina. And so that town has been occupied for some 14,000 years, and we come from there. And even people who have never been there know what that town looks like, because that's who we are. So there are about 6,000 speakers of Cherokee left in Oklahoma, of a population of about 300,000 people. In each situation, that's about 2% of the population. And both of these situations are part of an alarming global trend of linguistic decline. It's not just in our communities, it's not just in Native communities even, but it's also in immigrant communities that these phenomena are happening. You might be familiar with the Gullah Geechee communities, with also the Pennsylvania Dutch communities, with various immigrant communities, Polish, Russian, Italian communities in the United States. All of these communities have seen some kind of linguistic decline over the course of the 20th century. And according to UNESCO, if nothing is done, half of 6,000 plus languages spoken on Earth today will disappear by the end of the century. Language is also intrinsically bound up with sovereignty. The Bureau of Indian Affairs actually has criteria for federal recognition that include language as part of their recognition process. So not only our souls, not only our culture, not only our knowledge of who we are and our understandings of the world, but also our ability to be recognized as a sovereign nation are potentially endangered if we lose our language. And you can also draw parallels between linguistic and biodiversity. People have done this, when biodiversity declines, linguistic diversity does as well, because effectively what you're doing is destabilizing an environment and a population. And when people break up their social networks in that way, when you begin extracting resources from people like that, of course they're not able to speak their language in the same ways anymore because the social networks and the landscape are very different. So a lot of these linguistic changes owe to globalization, industrialization, urbanization, and accompanying social changes, which I give myself a little plug here. I wrote about this in my dissertation. Anybody wants to check it out? The book is upcoming. So what drives language shift? Well, I have one of the culprits right here. I'm not saying directly to implicate anybody or anything like that, but social network change, social structure change, and colonialization. When people from the outside come in and begin speaking another language because they don't know your language, then of course, you know, if you want food, if you want to buy goods, if you want to earn a living, you have to oblige them. And when that happens more and more and more, because there are more and more people selling goods, running factories, in charge of your schools, things like this, and in the case of many American Indian communities, when they take your children away and put them in boarding schools and punish them for speaking their languages, these things happen. So it has a lot to do with extraction of resources. It has a lot to do with control and who controls the resources. It has a lot to do with violence, assimilation, civilization, and industrialization, and enmeshment in the capitalist world system in general. Because when you start mass producing goods and extracting resources all over the world, social networks get disrupted and languages go by the wayside. This type of activity still continues. We are witnessing one of the largest examples of this in recent history, but also we're witnessing one of the largest responses to that by American Indians in recent history in the form of the Dakota Access Pipeline, the water protectors there, militarized actions against those water protectors, and the illegal destruction of grave sites and sacred places. These things have happened before. These things have happened many times before, and they're happening today. And I really feel like because of the lack of media coverage of these things, it's a bit funny that people don't know about this. It's almost as if we don't want to see this kind of thing, you know? I don't know if y'all are familiar with this, but there's this Michael Jackson song, They Don't Really Care About Us. Every time somebody asks, why would they do this on Facebook, I have to put that song up there. You know, that's my only example, that's all I'm saying. But the key behind all of this is, what does your 8-hour day look like? Because if it looks like interaction with people from your own community, if it looks like people working together and pulling together for each other's mutual benefit, which is a Cherokee concept called Gadugi, pulling together for everyone's mutual benefit, then it can sustain the social networks that are necessary to hold on to your language. If people are neighbors, if people are talking to one another in the language on a regular basis, then you can hold on to it. However, when your schools are controlled by an outside entity, State Board of Education, federal education guidelines, or when you work in a place or a factory that's run by somebody from outside your community, say Vanguard Plastics Factory in the case of Cherokees in North Carolina, or the Kohler Company in Wisconsin, for example, for the German communities up there, then you have to speak another language in order just to get by. You may not want to, but it becomes necessary in that situation. And once you get habituated into doing that, once you are doing that for 8 hours a day in school, you get done with school, you go to work at the factory, you go to work picking oranges for Donnell Farms in the wintertime like my mother did, then it flows into the home and it just becomes easier. So once you get habituated to this sort of thing, you end up not really thinking too much about it. Your social networks are all English-based instead of Cherokee or German or Polish or Russian. And so once that comes into the home, that's what your children hear. And when your children pick that up, all of a sudden one day they realize, I didn't learn that language. That happened to my mother. Her mother was a Cherokee speaker, and she didn't pass on the language because she was a student at one of the boarding schools. She went to Chilocco. She was punished for speaking the language, and she didn't want my mother or my aunts and uncles to undergo the same experience. And so she didn't allow them to learn Cherokee growing up. And my mother says the only time that her mother would speak Cherokee around the kids was when she didn't want the kids to know what was going on. So it was their secret language, you know. But that came at a detriment. So I thought that was unfair, you know, that was my birthright. So I endeavored to go get it. I endeavored to go learn the language. And now I'm finding out all these things, like that there are concepts in our language that just don't translate. You can talk about udanti, somebody's heart, the condition of somebody's heart and what they're like as a person, whether they're a good person. Or you can talk about duyukta, which means the way, the right way. You know, and it's just known what that means, the right way of being a person in the world. And if we lose those things, I think we lose some very important sense of who we are and what it means to be who we are. And so it's very important to maintain those. How do we fix it? Well, there's an immersion school in Cherokee, North Carolina right now. They're educating children in Cherokee language. And it's growing among the children, but we still need it among second language learners, because if the children don't hear it spoken in the community day to day, they'll see that it's only good for school, and they might give it up. So my mission is to train as many second language speakers of Cherokee as I can, and to flood the community effectively. So that's what I'm trying to do by teaching the language at UNC Chapel Hill and providing as much information as I can. There's also community efforts. I'm running a Cherokee coffee hour at UNC Chapel Hill. We're recruiting local businesses to help out in revitalization efforts. Excuse me. I gotta cut that off. Make it stop. Sorry about that. Okay. I'm also attempting to create a database of Cherokee language with my students at UNC and teaching second languages a little bit better, doing it by some kind of better pedagogy, and hopefully training immersion school teachers. So this is all connected. These things are not just isolated incidents. The Dakota Access Pipeline is just another historical event that continues the trend that is already growing. And many languages have already been casualties of this, but there are ways to fight this and to stem the tide. So here are some ways to help as far as the Dakota Access Pipeline efforts. The Camp of the Sacred Stone links are here for donations. You can follow these links. And these are some banks that are funding the pipeline. And you can also contact the White House. So that information is in my slideshow if anybody wants to get in touch after the presentations. So, Shkin, Badon.